Million Shirt Name Podcast with Dotun Adebayo and Tim Vickery.
And welcome to the Global Soccer Interactive. We join you live and direct if you're watching us on YouTube. It's your chance to have your say on this week's biggest stories in football. And today's conversation is going to be dominated by the managerial merry-go-round. We'll come to that in a moment or two. As ever, the legend Dino is in Rio. Tim Vickery, you good?
Yeah, very well. Looking forward to kicking around the ball around with you over the next few minutes.
And not just
Not only
me.
you, but a Portuguese living in Spain wearing a Denmark shirt. I don't know if this is some kind of tribute to the 2030 World Cup. I don't know, but looking forward to kicking the ball around with Miguel as well.
Yeah, Miguel Pereira, of course, the author of Pasión, a journey to the soul of Spanish football, not least. But great to have you with us as ever, mate.
Great to be here, and it's more of a throwback of when World Cups actually matter. More of that.
Well, yeah, we can come to that as well, because that is going to be an important part of the conversation as the World Cup expands. At least we expect it to expand. In any case, okay, let's go straight into this. And feel free to join us, by the way, on your social media, however you want to join us. If you've got any questions for Tim or Miguel or any other guests on the program, just hit the button to the right of the screen, the chat button, and we'll get your message amongst other things. Great. Miguel, you watch it from a distance, but you do follow the Premier League very, very closely. Surprised that there have been or more than one major managerial axing already. We're 4 or 5 games into the season. Are you surprised?
No, not at all. And I think we'll have more in the upcoming weeks. At least I expect it to. I think the frenetic style of the Premier League of now, when everyone wants results because of all the big investment clubs make, have turned the attention more to the managers. We're living in a football game that is more a manager football game than an actual players football game. Their relevance has become bigger and bigger through time, and also their exposure and the lack of time to prove themselves. And then again, we also have a lot of ownership that comes from other realities, from another dimension, who just want results, and they don't have the same patience that probably previous owners had. And then you have, in the case of Nuno, you have hot names on the market who are available. I don't know if Graham Potter would have been sacked if Nuno wasn't available at the time. I think it was a correlation of a situation. And sometimes that happens. Sometimes a good name is on the board. Happened with Benfica, also in Portugal. They just hired Jose Mourinho because he was available. Otherwise, they wouldn't have sacked their manager because he was doing okay-ish for their standards. So probably the Premier League is suffering of the same illness of necessity to be immediately on the front of the news.
Yeah, Tim, are you surprised though, even from your distance in Brazil? Because let's face it, your favourite upside-down head manager, Nuno Espirito Santo, he did very well last season. He came out of an amazing season for Nottingham Forest. Did he get sacked or did he walk or whatever it was? Well, were you surprised by that? That seems to be the odd one out, even with Miguel's logic about the pressures on managers now for commercial interest.
Well, it's part of Miguel's logic, I think. Miguel's impeccable Portuguese logic. That's ego-driven owners. I mean, in previous decades, I'm going back to when we were kids, after what he did last season, Nuno would be safe for a long, long time. But no, there's ego-driven owners. The whole West Ham thing fascinates me most because I can see so much of Brazilian football in there. I've written a piece in Portuguese in the last few days about this. Brazilian football, it's like a factory for producing fan discontent. The boos from the terraces, often very sparse crowds when the team isn't doing well. The team, when they come back from a bad away result, they get ambushed by their own fans at the airport, or they have their training centre invaded by angry fans going in. And why is this specific? There are a number of reasons, but there's one big footballing reason, which is, and Brazil is it's the size of a continent, and the history of football in Brazil is regional, not national. Now it's become national, and by becoming national, you reduce the amount of titles that are serious titles that can be won. And so, not all these teams that consider themselves massive teams, they can't all win the titles. So they're all failing. And I think there's a parallel there with West Ham, because West Ham, we did a podcast about it, the 1965 Cup Winners' Cup final against 1860 Munich, and you watch it today, and you're watching modern football. West Ham at that point, the future belongs to them. Ron Greenwood, this progressive coach, you got Moore, you got and Hurst and Peters coming through, that he's grown modern players, and you're thinking that West Ham they're going to be a major force. And for a number of reasons, it doesn't happen. But that is always inside the head of the West Ham fan. That's part of their tradition. They live in an internal 1965. They've always wanted that. And when they moved to the stadium, they didn't want to move. They loved Upton Park, or it was never known as the bowling ground at the time. We always called it Upton Park.
I never ever heard of the bowling ground till they were about to pull it down. Yeah,
indeed, and they loved it, and there were good reasons to love it. And it was a wrench to move, especially you're going to a stadium which isn't a football stadium, where you're a long way from the pitch. But there was a promise sold to the fans: bigger stadium. Now we can compete. Now you can have your 1965. Now you can have wonderful, free-flowing football and successful football, because now we have the capacity to compete. And they've gone through the same dance 3 times. You know what? We'll bring in Pellegrini. He's coach Man City. He's coach Real Madrid. Some of that stardust doesn't work. We'll appoint a pragmatist to stop us getting relegated. I know. We'll appoint Lopetegui. That's Spanish tradition. That's what we want. Doesn't work. We'll appoint a pragmatist to stop us getting relegated. I know. We'll appoint Graham Potter. Yes, he's a possession-based, progressive. Doesn't work. We'll appoint a pragmatist to stop us getting relegated. And so it's the same dance over and over and over again, because in the identity of the club, there is a permanent 1965, which after the move to the stadium became feasible once more. But it hasn't been feasible. So they're caught in this trap. They're caught in a trap between wanting to be glamorous and then being forced to be pragmatic. I think that's the specifics of the West Ham situation. Do you get, Miguel, clubs in Spain or Portugal with an identity of play as strong as this?
Oh, yeah, for sure. I think, in essence, what you said is the Premier League is getting to know foreign owners, and especially temperamental foreign owners. But in Southern Europe, we've grown used to them for decades. So this guy Marinakis is Greece, of course, and you know how Greek owners are. Some they go into the pitch with pistols on their back. Some are just intense on hiring and firing managers at will. He owns a football club in Portugal as well, Rio Ave, which actually was when Nuno started his career, and they already changed managers twice since he bought the club. So this is the type of ownership that Southern Europeans are used to. Very egotistic chairman. They need to be the protagonist of the story. I think it was Brian Clough who mentioned it when he was at Derby County, that he was sacked because they also had an egotistic chairman at the time, and he didn't find one in Forest. That's why he managed to stay so long at the club. So I think it's exactly the same thing. It's the need for football clubs who have owners who want to prove themselves over and over again to the supporters that they are of a different kind, if they have to win. And Tim mentioned Brazil, of course, and you remember how in the 70s Brazil had a league of like 50 teams, because when they began the National League, they had to put everyone in to make everyone content with the situation. Of course, only a couple of them would win trophies at the end of the year. And in Southern Europe, that's usual. You have teams in Spain, you have Atletico Madrid, for instance, which is an iconic club, or Valencia, who have a very definite style of sides that were once very good, very great, who competed for league titles. They can't do that anymore with the different financial situations they are in. But supporters still do believe they are as big as they were 30 years ago, 40 years ago. Of course, in Portugal happens the same. In Italy, of course, look at some of the clubs in Italy where they are now. You still talk with Torino fans, and they are still living in the shadow of that
No,
1940s
no,
iconic team.
you're
And they do
joking.
still believe that they are special, and that they do still
Uh,
believe that they are the chosen ones, and that Juventus is just a fraud in the city. And if you talk with them, they will probably say there are more supporters of Turin in the city than Juventus, which probably is not true, but it's a good legend, it's a good story. And I think every single nation has clubs like West Ham, clubs who have history, who had that moment, like you mentioned, that put them in a sacred spot, and supporters never forget that. Like supporters of Valencia don't forget they played 2 consecutive Champions League finals. Supporters of Atletico Madrid remember when they won more league titles than Barcelona during the 60s and the 70s, so they believe themselves to be the second team in Spain. It's all there. So I think now we're going to see that transition move more to the Premier League because of the foreign owners, because they are bringing that mentality with them. They bring the money, they bring the investment, they also bring things that weren't as used as it was now with owners. I don't know, like Jack Warner, for instance, a typical owner of a football club from his hometown who had time and time to wait for success, or Newcastle back in the day. It will be a completely different game as we advance in this dynamics.
Just briefly on Mourinho, do you think we're going from the chosen ones to special ones? Do you think if he fails at Benfica, he's got nowhere else to go apart from national teams?
The thing is, he wants to go to the Portuguese national team. Mourinho has the job of Portugal national side promised to him for a few months now from the new chairman of the Football Federation, which was Pedro Proença, a referee back in his day. And he was expected to be in charge in June. But then Roberto Martinez won the League of Nations, and they couldn't sack him because it was the second trophy of Portugal in the competition. So you cannot sack a manager who has just beat Spain in a final. So he's waiting to the World Cup, because Robert Martinez will probably walk out. If he wins the World Cup, he will walk out voluntarily because he knows that he's already done what he is proposed to do. And if he loses, which is more likely to happen, then we'll be sacked. And Mourinho is just waiting. I think Mourinho's plan was to be in Turkey this season, just waiting, buying his time. And then the sacking from Fenerbahce opened a possibility to go to Benfica, which is his club from childhood. So he gets to stay in Portugal, gets to stay near his family. And probably for him is just a small internship before the real deal begins in July, when he takes over Portugal after the World Cup. Probably a Portugal without Cristiano Ronaldo, which is one of the things that he's buying his time to not coincide with Ronaldo, because an ego is too much for the national side of Portugal. Two would be just catastrophe.
So that would be Mourinho as the coach in the build up to the World Cup that Portugal is co-hosting. Right? Yeah. It all fits. It all fits. We'll get to the 2030 World Cup in a minute, I hope, Dotun.
Yeah, definitely. Let's try and get as much in as we can of this conversation. I saw Jose Mourinho being interviewed after the Champions League match against Chelsea the other day. He's returned to Chelsea, much touted, and Jose is no stranger to drama. However, he posed a different character. I think there's a sobering experience that he had in Turkey. And I imagine it's the same for anybody who's been hyped up to his level, when you suddenly realize you're not that special. You're not that special. And we saw...
Is he capable of making such a realization?
I think he's changed now. I mean, you told me, Miguel, I don't think he's the same person. And you could see what his shortcomings were. If you saw Galatasaray's amazing victory over Liverpool in the Champions League, I mean, okay, it was settled by a penalty or whatever, but Galatasaray are no pushovers. And despite the fact that Jose huffed and puffed in the Turkish Super League, he couldn't get near Galatasaray. And I think that experience has sobered him up somewhat. Anyway, he came across as a very, determined. He certainly didn't show any, and he wouldn't, would he? Didn't show any sense of, I'm just biding my time here at Benfica. It would be disrespectful to the fans and to the history of the club and so on. However, I wonder if you've noticed a change in Jose Mourinho, however temporary his time will be at Benfica.
I think the greatest change is that he played his first Champions League match in 5 years. And if you talk about Jose Mourinho 10 years ago and you say Mourinho is going to spend 5 years without playing a Champions League match, not coaching national sides, but coaching actual football clubs, you would say you're a lunatic. I think that was the thing that sobered him up. To be at Stamford Bridge for his first Champions League match since he played for Tottenham against Leipzig, it's a long, long time for a manager like Mourinho. I think he relished the experience to be back with the big boys after spending not only the 2 years in Turkey, but also his period at Roma. And I think he wants to make the most of it because he knows he's going to transition to international management. And once you transition to international management, it's hardly an impossibility of coming back at all. And like we said before, he's aiming at 2030, so he's aiming the 4 next years to be all focused on Portugal. And I think he wants to make this experience less tense, less about him, about his ego, about his character. Because also, if he wants to be Portugal's national manager, he cannot be as volatile and as aggressive as he usually is because he's now coaching Benfica. So you cannot have the Porto supporters or the Sporting supporters against you all the time because they are going to have your back in 8 months' time, probably. And you cannot be downplaying Benfica as well as a great institution Benfica is, because if you're going to leave them in 8 months and you already know that you're probably going to leave them, regardless of the results, then they will probably have a bad image of you. So he's playing like a juggler, tossing a lot of balls into the air, trying to keep the equilibrium there. So it's very unlikely that we'll see the old Mourinho in the next few months. I think things must go very sideways for him if we have to catch his old persona back on the game.
Yeah, and just a note on Nuno going to West Ham. You've explained, the landscape very eloquently. I thought, not least about Marinakis at Nottingham Forest. Whatever the rights or wrongs of that may be, it's madness. We know it's madness. You can't be a football fan and not realise that to get Nottingham Forest where you got them last season, and then to lose your job as a result of that, or however ego trip the owner might be, is just complete football madness. However, I'm not sure what he's going to achieve in West Ham. You follow the Portuguese football press, obviously, and I wonder if there's any indication there as to, first of all, why he took this job, because in many ways it's a poison chalice. Tim listed a plethora of the managers who have come and failed there. It's much easier to fail at West Ham than to succeed.
Yeah, well, the pragmatists have succeeded, but that success is never good enough, and so, I mean, your lot, Charlton, they were in this position once. The pragmatists were doing really well.
We swapped coaches.
Yeah, and then you decided you wanted to be more glamorous, and you couldn't be more glamorous. The pragmatists have done well at West Ham, haven't they? I think he can do well. I think he can stop them conceding so many goals from crosses. He'll organise a defence, and in Jared Bowen, he's what a weapon he's got there for his transitions and counterattacks. Do you think he'll do well, Miguel?
I think it will. I think it's also, we were talking about chairman egos, but managers have huge egos as well. And I think he wants to prove himself. I think he has that episode he lived with Tottenham still in his memory. And the idea that he couldn't triumph with clubs with more glamour than Wolves or Nottingham, who are, of course, Midland clubs, have a different attitude to sports, a different kind of support base. And I think he really wants to make a name of himself in London, and probably West Ham was the best opposite. And also to prove himself that what happened last year was no fluke. That is a guy that is capable to pick up a side, to create a team spirit, to apply his methods were always, like Tim said, very pragmatic, very counter-attacking football, pushing on speed, transitioning, defend with real care. And I think if not this season, we'll probably lay the base to that on the following season. And I think during this season, we'll have West Ham in mid-table for sure. If that is enough, probably not for the supporters, as we know. But for the board, it will be enough to keep them for another season. And then it depends on what he's gone into the market to buy, to adjust to his idea of football, because he has a lot of players now in the squad that will adjust, like Bowen, even the possibility of having a player like Wilson or even Paquetá will be very helpful to the way that he plays. But if he has the right players on the market, both in January and the next summer, I think he can create a very interesting project at West Ham. But it will never be enough, like Tim said, for a club like West Ham,
Exactly.
because he will never be Ron Greenwood. He will never
Yeah.
have a player with the technical ability of Bobby Moore, the leadership or the charisma. That's for sure.
So he steadies the ship for 2 years. He has 2 good, solid seasons, does well, and it's not enough, and they sack him and go for someone who will look to play. Yeah, not less. Who will look to play beautiful, progressive football, and then that'll fail, and they'll call him back, or they'll get David Moyes back. It's the same dance they do time and time and time again. I would love to see him break this out. I would love to see him break out of this and actually become what they want to be, because I'm an old romantic with that tradition as well.
Just,
But
if you're in London, you can do that with Crystal Palace, because the type of club Crystal Palace is allows you to buy time, allows you to buy gratefulness for managers to stay long, who have an idea, an identity. But with clubs that feel that their support base is entitled to something, wherever they're in the right or not, it's very complicated to succeed, because it's never enough. You win the Conference League, but you should have won the Europa League. You've won the Europa League, you should have been in the Champions League, and so on and so on. It happened with Newcastle also. Great fan base. They all think they deserve to be champions every single season because of the importance of the stadium, the culture of the club. And when they don't get that, there's frustration in the air. And there are a lot of sort of clubs that live in that permanent circle of frustration.
Yeah, although, as Tim says, the owners have got themselves to blame because they promise things that they're not going to deliver. They probably know they're not going to deliver it, but they promise it and say it at the time. And the fans say, okay, then go on, they show us. And then when you don't, it's a disappointment. I'm also intrigued by Ange Postecoglou, because exactly what you said about Marinakis, Postecoglou must know that. I know he's Greek. I get that. I know it's Helava first. I get that. However, who would want to work for an owner who's prepared to name you and shame you on live television after a match, or call you out, or whatever it was that happened after that match of the spat with Nuno from the end of last season, where we knew, I mean, I'm sure I said it on air, that his job has just become untenable. How can you go back? I mean, they came up with some excuses and said, oh, no, they were just talking about the injury to a player. But we could see it very, very clearly. We could see the passion, the emotion, the anger, the disrespect. And we also saw, to be fair to Nuno, the dignity of the coach. Because if that was me, there'd be a scrap on the pitch, for most of us. Anyway, that aside, why on earth would Ange Postecoglou walk in there? It can't just be for the job, can it? Or can it be? And also, what on earth can he hope to achieve with a depleted squad, by the way, that Nottingham Forest have now, because some of their best players, took the transfer shilling and went elsewhere?
I think it's, again, the identity culture and your background. I think Postecoglou was raised in a Greek community, so he knows that. He knows that volatileness. He knows that if you have an owner like that, you're probably going to get sacked even if you do good. But at the same time, I think they are mentally focused on doing good, and they absorb themselves from the type of owner that they have, and they just buy their time with results. And I think Postecoglou really likes the experience of being in the Premier League after spending so many years trying to get in. The idea of just leaving it out, it probably went too much for him, and he wasn't probably expecting the sacking after won the Europa League, which was a massive feat. Once again, another football club that has won its first major trophy in so many years, and then they go and sack the manager, despite all the issues with the league performance, which was really below the club standards. But at the same time, I think he's in that dynamic, that ego dynamic, that I want to be in the greatest league in the world right now. I need to have a job here. I don't care if it's Nottingham Forest and Marinakis. I don't care if it's Everton. I don't care if it's Leeds United. I don't care if it's West Ham. I just need to be in the pack. And I think for many managers, the decision is to be there regardless.
Do you think that this is a relationship that will start with Ange turning up and saying, Kalimata, mate, yes, and it will end with both of them calling each other Malaka? Do you think that's the way it's going to go?
With the sound of Zorba the Greek on the background.
Well, I don't know about Malaka. The word that I knew from my Greek geographical heritage was Budana, they kept calling everybody Budana. But anyway, I don't know what that means.
I think that's the Cypriot thing, because you grew
It's
up
a
with
Cypriot one, is it?
I think so, yeah.
Okay.
They'll sell all kinds of T-shirts with Malacca on it, you know.
Okay. Yeah, and it's probably less misogynistic than Budana, although I don't know what that means, obviously. But there is an elephant in the room, and this elephant is huge, maybe not so huge, and Portuguese, and is at Manchester United. So Ruben Amorim has survived all these other managers who arguably did better than he's doing at the moment. What's going on there? And how long has he got? Because, I mean, I'm not sure he's going to make it to the end of the season. You probably have well, I should think most football observers have the same opinion. What's going on? Is it just about the contract that they've given him at Manchester United? They can't afford to sack him.
It's very strange. I think it's like that metaphor of a cockroach in an atomic explosion that they managed to survive nonetheless. I think he's surviving the unsurvivable in a sense that at sporting level, probably for the past 6 months, he should have been out of a job, I think. And I think now we're dealing again with egotistic owners because I don't think they want to recognize the huge mistake they did in hiring a manager that had only proven himself in a couple of seasons, that only plays one certain style of play that never have fitted neither the squad nor the type of play that you have in the Premier League. So both are wrong regarding to that approach, and then doesn't have the flexibility to change, to adjust, to search for short-term solutions to buy himself time. And we're not talking about buy himself time like Alex Ferguson did in the 80s, because then if you bought time, it was buying 5 years into the future. Now you have to buy 5 months into the future, but he never made the effort. He has been very vocative in the press, stating that he is his own man. And probably that is also a PR mistake from the ownership, because they practically give the sensation they hired a lunatic. They hired a guy that is prepared to lose with his ideas, and then took a size of a juggernaut football club into hell with him just for the sake of it. And I think that is very problematic. Probably the situation is regardless money. Probably Man United has too much to pay for Amorim, and as they had with Ten Hag and their previous sacked managers, and they are trying to find a solution. Probably there's no other manager in the market available that they think would replace him and improve what he's doing. Because let's face it, without a job now, we don't see many managers who probably would pick up Man United and start from scratch all over again and build an important side for the future. That's what the club needs. Not only immediate results, but also to create a legacy for the upcoming years, with all the project of the change of the whole Trafford Stadium and all the idea of remaining to be a very important club. But then you have the news like 2 weeks ago that they remain one of the clubs most valuable in the world. So probably the owners are very comfortable with that, regardless of the sporting situation. And if they have the opportunity, if there's a manager in the market that appears free, I think they will go for him and they will sack Amorim at that moment, but not until then, even if he continues to lose matches during the week at an astonishing rate for any Man United manager in history.
Did you think it was going to be a disaster when it happened?
No, I never thought it's going to be a disaster because I didn't knew enough Amorim to be able to anticipate that he would be such a problematic character in terms of ego. I think he would come with his idea. I already knew he would like to play the 3-4-2-1 that he played at Braga and Sporting. And I also saw that the club would buy the exact players that he needed. I don't think they did. No, not in January, not in the summer. I don't think they took the needs of the squad too deeply. And I think that the moves they did for certain players were well below the standards that they actually require. But I also thought that he's going to be smart enough to adapt if the project failed him at the beginning, and see that he isn't able to move. I think it probably is a shame, because he actually traced the line for the rest of his career, because every single football club that will hire in the future will know that this is it. This is the guy that you're going to hire. This is I would say like a tactical maniacs, like the issues that got Bielsa, which is such a vanguardist and such an important manager, having so many issues to be hired by important clubs, because he was much like Amorim. I will play my own way. I will play my tactical display. I will play with my mentality. If you like it, buy it. If you don't like it, just leave me alone. I don't know if Amorim has the stomach to be managing the Espanyols or those football clubs into the future. He'll probably be rich enough at that time. I don't know if he aims to come back to Portugal to lick his wounds in the future, because in Portugal he will always have a job. That's for sure. I don't know if he ends up in Brazil, where so many Portuguese managers have ended over the years. But I really do know that if you're a chairman of Barcelona, Real Madrid, Atletico, Juventus, you're not
Not a
going
hope.
to hire Amorim.
No,
You're
not
not
a hope.
going to fall into that trap once again that Man United fell. And probably they should have been doing a better assessment of him during the casting. And I think they were just too in love with the way that Sporting played, which was brilliant. And I think they were too in love with the way that he revolutionized the club. You have to remember that Sporting before Amorim spent 18 years without a league title. Amorim won 2.5. That is more titles that Sporting had won in 50 years. So for them, probably that was an idea that this is a guy that can build things from scratch, a little bit like Alex Ferguson did with Aberdeen before going to Man United. I think they had that similarity in mind, but they would have been better if they had assessed his character and to believe that he would not be a guy that would be moved by the need to adapt and would be his own man until the very end, even if that means sunking the ship and him with him.
Yeah, the one thing I don't understand is how, here, and you will know this phrase, I don't need to tell you, how he has not lost the dressing room. There are players there who look like they don't want to be there. And not only they look like they don't want to be there, some of the new players, there's certainly one, Brian Mbeumo, somebody pointed out that, after or during one of the matches, the camera zoomed in on him and he had this expression on his face, which basically suggested, look, what on earth have I done coming here? I was at Brentford, I was doing really well, I was scoring, and now I can't get a sniff for toffee. And somehow none of them are coming out and criticising, as far as I know anyway, Amorim. And whatever we say, we're not hearing from the board. If he were to lose the dressing room, if the players were to revolt and say, look, enough of this, enough of your way or no way, at that point, I can't see the board still hanging on to him, whatever the cost. Can you?
I don't think he has the dressing room really. I think the famous press conference after the Grimsby match, when he said that the players spoke loud enough about what they thought, I think it was a message clear that they weren't buying. They weren't buying his idea. They weren't buying his methods. They weren't buying his philosophy. And I think there was a moment when I was watching live the press conference, and I think he wants to be sacked. He really wants to have his paycheck on his table tomorrow, because I think he's tired of it, and probably is now in that stage where he doesn't care if he's sacked or not. And I think the players know that, so the players are also buying their time because they don't need to confront him, because it's everyone can see the situation. They don't need to be the bad guys in this. They don't need to be the ones that are messing up with the club members, with the supporters, creating a negative tension from within. I think they are all aware that Amorim time is the dead man walking, and he probably will be sacked before the end of the year if the opportunity rises. So they actually don't even, and also you're looking at a squad of players that never won anything with the club. So they don't have that legacy, they don't have that relevance, that dressing room mentality to impose themselves against any manager, being Amorim or whatever, because they are not the Man United that we know. You don't have any leader there from the old days that says, no, I remember when we were good. I remember when we won stuff, and we just want to go back to that. They're all gone. So you have guys with strong character like Bruno Fernandes, like Harry Maguire, but they are there only for a couple of seasons and they never enjoyed the good days. So probably that's one of the things that they are not being as outspoken as they will probably should be in this situation.
Yeah, let's bring in somebody else into the conversation as well. The young Nigerian football journalist based in Lagos, but from over here, from the UK, essentially, Atalani Oyewumi. Atalani, gosh, where are you?
Afternoon, gents. I'm currently in the office. I decided I do this one at a stable location rather than last time. So yeah, I'm still in the office.
Well, appreciate the efforts. And you came in just at the right time, because we were talking about how on earth Ruben Amorim has survived at Manchester United. And I hear that if there's a vacancy going at the Emirates, you're thinking of appointing him if there was a vacancy going, because, of course, you're Arsenal through and through and through.
I'm not sure there's enough money on God's green earth that you could use to pay me to take Amorim as Arteta's successor, in all honesty. I don't want to say I'm very much Arteta in, but if we were to get rid, I'm looking at Fabregas, I'm looking at hopefully a Zidane before I'm looking at 100 managers, and then Amorim can join the back of the list.
Yeah, it's funny though. I mean, it is funny, the conversation we've been having with Miguel about managers generally. Arteta only has to lose one game for Arsenal fans to sort of start saying, get rid of Arteta. He knows that. Every time he does a press conference, you can almost feel the weight of that pressure upon him. Is it ultimately, though, pressure that is beneficial to the team's success?
I think I agree that it is quite volatile. I don't think the pressure is beneficial. I think a lot of the time the frustration is with the lineup itself. So if you take the Newcastle game, for instance, he finally played what we'd consider to be a proactive lineup. And yes, we were 1-0 down for most of that game, but I would have personally been able to live with that result because we actually went for it with a better team. If Trossard scores rather than hitting the post, if a couple, duels go a different way, the result is different. Obviously, we came back to win it, so there's a lot of outcome bias, I feel like, with football fans. You take the Liverpool game, for instance, the narrative is, Arteta's never going to be a winner. He plays too defensive football. But if you take out a Szoboszlai wonder goal, that's a 0-0 game where we're feeling quite good about a draw at Anfield. So I think perspective is so important because it's easy to say get rid. You can't name 5 managers in the world that are better than Mikel Arteta, and I'll stand on that. Whether he's won or not, there are proven winners out there. You look at last night, Luis Enrique is probably the best manager in the world because the team that he just took to Spain to beat Barcelona was a half PSG team and he still got the job done. But
it was only a half Barcelona team as well, maybe a two-thirds Barcelona
Two-thirds Barcelona.
Yeah, fair enough.
Yeah. But yeah, Arteta generally top 5 in the world. I feel like he's not perfect. Sometimes I want to call him Lego Head, and I do call him Lego Head, but I still do back him.
I don't even know what that means. Okay, we want
his hair is very it's been stuck on like a block of Lego, so we call him Lego Head.
I thought that was quite fashionable myself, but if you want to go for Lego Head, go for it. But no, we want to talk World Cup. We want to move the conversation on in a minute or two, but just very quickly to both of you, actually, Miguel, Atalani, who's next? If we're talking about the Premier League, who's the next manager to face the chopping block, do you think? Anybody fancy going first on that? Miguel,
I'll leave it to Miguel first.
If there were logic in the game, it will be Amorim, as we discussed, but we run out of logic here in the equation. So it's a hard one to get because I don't think most clubs are doing okay, regardless of what they should have been doing at this time of the season. So I don't see many reasons to sack anyone. Leeds probably underperforming. Probably they should be a little bit better. But regardless, I would say Amorim.
You see what a cruel person Dotun is, because he just wants someone to get sacked so he's got something to talk about.
No,
that's all he
I'm
wants.
a journalist. You're right. I'm a journalist. If you meant by cruel, you meant see what a journalist is. See what a great journalist he is. He's waiting for the next news story. However, it is. I mean, I feel for every manager currently. I don't know what's happened in the Premier League. It's like one of those innovations, like the long throw-in that has come back this season. It doesn't seem as if there are many managers that are truly safe if they get 2 or 3 results go.
They're all caretakers these days, aren't they?
Yeah, isn't that mad?
Yeah.
Isn't that mad? Do you not think so?
That's the way it's become. They're all caretaker managers.
I'm looking at the managers giving interviews after a match and thinking, well, you're here today, gone tomorrow. Who cares what you say? Mm-hmm. Atalani, you have a go, though. Amorim aside, can you see any pressure? Who's the most under pressure manager? Let me put it that way so that Tim doesn't accuse me of being evil.
I think Vitor Pereira is in a very tough position at the minute because the Wolves squad is underwhelming. It's quite simply isn't good enough. The past couple of seasons, obviously the teams that have been promoted have gone straight back down. But I feel like a lot of us had the feeling that Sunderland, Leeds would perhaps have a chance, and that's the way it's materializing. I know a lot of people thought Brentford would be in a worse position, losing their manager, captain, and 2 strikers, but they seem to be weathering the storm quite well. Wolves are the one where I believe Wolves are last, and they haven't gotten a point this season. They definitely haven't won a game, which...
Yeah, but obviously they came to Tottenham.
They got a draw.
Dr. Tottenham gave them a point.
Oh, yeah.
And nearly the 3. Come and see Dr. Tottenham. We'll make everything all right.
That was the Sunday 8 p.m. or 5:30. Sorry, the Saturday. That was a good.
And
oh yes, because everyone just decided.
Bodo Glimt went and saw Dr. Tottenham as well the other day, but I didn't want to mention it. Do you not think Maresca? I'm looking at Maresca and I'm looking at that Chelsea squad. I'm not 100% convinced about it, but do you not think he might feel the heat if a couple of results go the wrong way?
I think amongst the big boys, relative big boys, because obviously Villa are not traditional top 6, but they're sitting 16th, and I think they've scored goals in 2 different games. Bar the 3-1 win, I believe it was 3-1, they've been incredibly lackluster, and they've ended up rocking up with the same defense they had in 2021, which they've sort of hustled backwards. Last season was Champions League football, John Duran off the bench scoring every week, and all of a sudden things are kind of falling apart a little bit. So I'd look at Villa and Emery's job under a little bit of pressure before I look at Chelsea. Chelsea, I'm also looking at the board and the fact they've spent £1 billion and not a single member of their defence gets into Arsenal's defence or Liverpool's defence when fit. And those are the standards, because Reece James doesn't exist as far as I'm concerned. He'll play 10 games and then we know how it's going to end. The same thing happens every time, which is unfortunate because when fit, he is the best right back in the country. But I feel like Chelsea, there's enough context. The Club World Cup, the Conference League will buy him a bit of time because trophies are the currency of football at the end of the day. If you look at Arteta, if he doesn't win that FA Cup, August 1st, 2020 is a very important day in Arsenal history. If he doesn't win that FA Cup, he does not survive a single year in that job, because there was a point in November where we scored 2 goals in 11 games. It was torrid football. The only win we got was Aubameyang penalty away at Man U, and I'll never forget it. So I think Maresca will be given a bit more time. Todd Bowley, he obviously wants a certain mold of manager. He clashed with Tuchel because Tuchel was very much like, leave me alone, please, let me focus on my job. So I think they'll give Maresca a vote of confidence.
I think it's strange because, Vitor Pereira just got his contract renewed a few weeks ago.
Yeah.
And I think Wolves are aware of the situation they are in. I think one of the reasons that it probably might not be sacked, at least not now, is because they do know where the project is going and they do know that the project is not going anywhere upward. So probably I think they renew his contract having that in their minds. And also Aston Villa, curiously enough, a few weeks ago, just hired a new sports director, which is a very personal friend of Unai Emery. So it would be very odd if they hire a sports director who is a friend of a manager, then has to sack him a few weeks later. So I think it's quite safe in that. I think they also are aware of the economic situation the club lives in, and probably the idea of being back at the Champions League bought him time. Of course, I think Atalanta mentioned spot on, trophies are the currency now. But if you are a club like Aston Villa, if you come back to the Champions League, you also gain, not as a trophy, but you gain time, you gain perspective as well to be there on a long term. And I think they're going to do the long term with Emery.
Tim, over to you. Let's talk World Cup business. Running out of time.
Yes.
Expansive World Cup, 64 teams is what's expected.
What's expected. It's what South America is pushing for. And it was the idea was first floated a few months ago and didn't get a lot of global support, but they haven't given up. And they had a meeting, South American Confederation had a meeting with Infantino in New York last week to try and push this again. Why? It all comes down to 2030, which is that it's the centenary of the World Cup. And South America thought it would get it because it's the centenary. You know, it started Uruguay 1930. Now, obviously, Uruguay, one city, it can't stage a modern World Cup on its own. So a joint bid, Uruguay, Argentina, Paraguay. And they really thought, this is the sentimental choice. We will get the 2030 World Cup. But FIFA went a different way. They went Spain, Portugal, and Morocco. As a sop to South America, they said, and this is just a bizarre decision, they said, all right, you can have 3 games. 1 in Argentina, 1 in Uruguay, 1 in Paraguay. So, you know, the teams there, you know, you'll play 1 game. So that will be the hosts, the first game of those 3 hosts against whoever they're drawn against. And then you've got to travel all the way across across the Atlantic. Now, the bizarre thing here is the difference in temperature in June, July between like Buenos Aires or Montevideo and Spain, Portugal, Morocco. It can be 30, 35 degrees. It's like walking in a fridge in those places in June, July. I've done it too many times than I care to remember. But anyway, from a South American point of view, all this is very, very unsatisfactory. And Paraguay are planning to build a stadium that they don't need for one game. So obviously, the game becomes, let's try and get more matches. How can we get more matches than these three, one in each of the three countries? How can we do it? And they thought, well, there's only one way we can do it. As a special, romantic, fraternal gesture to 100 years of the World Cup for 2030, and for 2030 only, dear FIFA, can we have 64? 64 teams. That would give more of the FIFA membership a chance to participate. And it would also give us more games in South America, and it would make the investments that we have to carry out, it will make them financially more viable. So as I say, so far this hasn't met with a great deal of support, either from Africa or Asia. But I don't know. As we get closer, will some of those countries think, yeah, we could qualify? That means,
we'll come on to Nigeria's, what Nigeria, because
Nigeria, you could probably have 200 countries in the World Cup, and Nigeria would find a way to make their qualification difficult.
So you're saying Nigeria, the vast country that is Nigeria, with at least 800 billion people, is the size of Sri Lanka. Come on now, don't be like that. But Tim makes a point though, Miguel. And I wonder if the deciding factor won't be so much the South American countries, but FIFA looking at that and thinking, there's a lot of money. There is a lot of money in having a 64-team World Cup.
I think we have to go backwards, and I think we have to go to the period where the hosts were decided, and probably this explains why we don't have the decisions like 20 years ago under Blatter or under Avalanche. We're having a new dynamics where there's no vote practically. There's only one contender that goes all the way to the end. And South America, of course, had the better claim emotionally. The last World Cup states that were in Brazil in 2014, it would be 16 years without World Cup in South America, where they used to have one every 4 years back in the day. But then again, they miscalculated, and Portugal, Spain won. They originally, the first bid was only Portugal and Spain. Then it was Portugal, Spain, and Ukraine, because when the war started, the Spanish Federation thought it would be a good idea to add Ukraine just for fun and to get a couple of emotional votes. Then it was Portugal, Spain, and Morocco, because they wanted to have the CFA support on that. And then there was Portugal, Spain, Morocco making a deal with Saudi Arabia. They would support Saudi Arabia unconditionally for 2034 if Saudi Arabia, who now practically owns the game, gave their support in 2030. So that's how South America was beaten. And probably after that, since Infantino has decided he wants a ring to rule them all, like old Soren there, really wanted to give him a sort of a gift in having. It was 3 matches, or the possibility of playing the group stage of those 3 nations would be directly classified as hosts to the tournament to be played there. But I think they are doing the silly job of proposing something that has been FIFA's idea all along. I think the most interest in this is not South American federations. I think it's FIFA. I think FIFA needs to be constantly provoking something different. And he knows that in 2034 it will be all about Saudi Arabia. They will own the show. FIFA will just be a sidekick on the event. And this World Cup is already so splashed through the world, having matches being played both in Europe and Africa at the same time. So why not add just a little bit of fun and join the South Americans as well? And I think they probably, the idea of Infantino having a show with matches being played in the morning, in the afternoon, in the night, different time zones at the same time, with different weathers, it all fits in the idea of show business, right? I think it's the idea of having that global tournament, a little bit like UEFA did with the Euros when they had a host city per nation. Basically, nothing has been invented. It's always a recycling of ideas. And that Euros idea was absolutely bonkers back in the day. And I think FIFA thought, okay, we can do this, but at the nation level, not at a city level. Just add as many nations as we can. And if we have to amplify the number of participants, even the better, because those federations will vote on the next FIFA Congress. And of course, we know who will vote for. They will vote for the guy who opened the doors for them to have at least a first World Cup experience. Probably with the 64 World Cup, it will be the first time many nations will be playing at a World Cup. And you know that if you play in a World Cup, you don't forget forever the experience. And I think it's all the idea of having everyone pleased, and the game always ends up in the last position regarding arguments for the sake of it. And probably the idea will be just if they could have a World Cup with 200 nations, they would. I think that's the point.
Well, that'll be the future. There's room for it. There's capacity, maybe, certainly on this planet. And I wonder, Atalani, which African nations will be most pleased were the World Cup to expand to 64, even as a one-off. I can imagine Nigeria like, phew, but which others? It's true, though, isn't it? You're laughing, but Nigeria are not going to make the World Cup. The only way they're going to make the next one.
I believe we'll get into the new hope that we now have.
Indeed.
But to answer the original question, an absolute lifeline. We phoned a friend and CAF delivered for us. I feel like it's countries like Lesotho, Zimbabwe that will be the biggest beneficiaries, perhaps in Madagascar. Nigeria, more often than not, we will sort ourselves
What
out.
about the East, Atalani? What about
perhaps
Kenya, Tanzania,
South Sudan? You know,
Ethiopia.
Exactly. Those are the countries that will probably, their ears will be pricking up at the idea of it. But I understand the concept of it being the world's game and having as many countries as possible, cultures and people being passionate about it. But it starts to feel a bit like a participation prize, which maybe isn't necessarily a bad thing. It is a World Cup at the end of the day, and it's not out of reason for the World Cup to grow in size. It started with 13 countries, moved to 16, then 24, then 32, now 48. So 64 seems like the natural progression from there. But as Miguel mentioned, logistically, I feel like it's going to be a nightmare. And I guess to them, it's immaterial, the time zones, the weather, all those sorts of factors. But if I'm playing a game in Argentina on Tuesday and I'm supposed to be in Portugal or Morocco on Friday, my opponents, if they've not had to travel, they have an inherent advantage. And so that somebody is going to complain, and somebody will complain, oh, we've moved from artificial grass to real grass, synthetic pitches. There's so much nuance to it that probably hasn't been considered, because the immediate thing is cheddar. And you mentioned the gradual pivot towards Saudi, or Saudi taking over the game. You look at Saudi, I think it was the PIF that bought Electronic Arts for $55 billion. They are trying to, monetize and take over everything, essentially. So this is perhaps FIFA's fight back, but I think there has to be a limit somewhere. I'm not sure where the limit is, but 64 feels like a lot. Until there's genuinely enough sufficient footballing nations where there are world-class players in enough of these countries that there will be quality football and you're not saturating the product, I don't think it's necessary. Although it would be cool to say, oh, X-African country has made it, X country from here has made it.
As Miguel said, there's nothing new under the sun. So they'll probably look at an old Champions League model and make sure that the top teams, the European teams, don't, have to play the sorts of qualifying rounds of the World Cup. So they'll come in at the sort of, the old school World Cup stage.
No, I think what will happen is I am already prepared to assume that this is going to happen. If the idea has been out there, it probably will be voted and will be accepted, and people will eventually going to embrace it. Like Atalani said, football is in permanent change, and people who moved from the European Cup to Champions League found it odd. People who moved from the Champions League with champions to 32 teams found it odd, and then things keep on happening. Probably the PFI buying EA Sports is a very important thing also, because the EA Sports, as you know, has lost the FIFA license to the World Cups, and now they're probably going to get back in, and that's also money they have to recover there. So what I think will happen is, if you have 64 teams and you have different nations in different continents. They will do like they did back in the day when there was only one nation, but they do geographical distribution. So if you remember well, for instance, in the World Cup in '82, Italy played in Galicia, while Brazil played in Andalusia, which meant that when they met in the second group stage, actually, they played in Barcelona. So they started the competition in very different areas where weather was very different. The weather from Galicia in the summer is like 22, 23 degrees best, while Brazil was playing at a hot 35, 36. And they found themselves playing at Barcelona, which was probably 28, 29 at the time. So what we're probably going to do is we'll have groups that will only be playing Argentina. We have groups that are only going to be played in Paraguay or in Uruguay. We have groups that are going to be played only in Portugal, in Spain, or in Morocco. And then for the last 16 or whatever formula they're going to get, last 32, they will have the South Americans play at least the first preliminary round, the knockout round, in South America, in Africa as well. And then they will probably going to be mixed from the last 16 onwards. So most of the countries will be seeded geographically. Probably is going to happen the same now with the World Cup in 2026, with most of the nations be playing in the future draw in Mexico or in Canada or in different areas of the United States, so they don't have to move along such a huge distance. And I imagine in 2030 that was going to happen the same thing. You have Argentina, Uruguay, Paraguay, and Brazil all playing in the same area. You have Portugal, Spain, France, and Italy playing in Spain probably. The northern European countries playing in Portugal has a better weather, more connected with the Atlantic weather from the north, and you have the African, Asian teams playing in Morocco. I think it will be the solution they're going to find.
I've just come up with an ingenious idea, Tim. I mean, I'm going to be brief because we haven't got a huge amount of time, and I do want Atulani to tell us about that friend that Nigeria called up. Because if Nigeria can do it, every other country can do it, surely. Anyway, but I've just come up with
you need another friend to be as incompetent as South Africa were this time. You can't always think on that. But anyway.
Okay, I'll call two friends. But Atulani, I think it was you that was saying a moment or two ago, you can't be playing one game in South America and then a couple of days later be playing another game in Portugal when your opponents haven't had to travel. But why not just make them travel? Why not get them to simulate the experience? Why not force them to go to South America? No, you're laughing. This is an ingenious idea. Why not say
it sounds like an ingenious idea to create more climate damage.
I was going to say, I work for an energy company at the moment, and our ESG people would not be particularly happy if I was supporting such a treacherous idea. More travel.
Indeed.
We've got enough.
Okay, let's just have the World Cup in my home territory of North London. Then it will save on the energy. Why bother going anywhere else? So, how has Nigeria managed to creep back into the World Cup, Atulani? Oh my word!
Well, sometimes when you pray, blessings fall into your lap. And I feel like this is a perfect example of that because Teboho Mahuena is one of the best midfielders in Africa. African Cup of Nations, he was in the team of the tournament. South Africa went out in the semi-finals to Nigeria on penalties, and he was the stalwart for that team. The CAF qualifying is different to European qualifying. You have 8 matches. No, that's incorrect. You have 10 matches, and you're only allowed 2 yellow cards. That is quite harsh. For context, Zubimendi and Rice got cards yesterday, and they're on 2 cards, but they need 3 in 8 games. So that's 37.5%. Here, you need a yellow card in 20% of your games, and that's it. So Mahuena got 2 cards, first game and the 4th game, which means he was suspended for 1 game. What does South Africa do?
Absolutely standard in international football. The second yellow card suspends you. Absolutely standard.
I think it's a little bit harsh.
Meaning no excuse whatsoever.
And everyone knows it. If you're playing Football Manager, you try and field a player, it won't let you start the game. We were talking about Championship Manager the other time. But what do? They play him, they win. Rules are rules. And the appeal took a long time. We weren't sure about it, so we couldn't rely on it because we didn't know this was going to happen. There's always some sort of loophole. I don't want to suggest grease palms, but anything can happen. And finally, there was a ruling, and it's a flat out, they actually put the gavel down and said, no, this isn't happening. And they forced them to forfeit the game, which means not only have they lost 3 points, but their goal difference advantage has been it's a 5-point swing essentially, because they won 2-0, now they've lost 3-0, and that means that Benin and South Africa are on 14 points and Nigeria on 11. And in African qualifying, the top four second place teams then enter another playoff round to see if they can make it. But the second place team in this group is on 14 points. For context, the seventh place second place team would be first in this group. So every other group has been more competitive. Well, maybe less competitive. That's why they have more points, depending on how you look at it. So now Nigeria on 11 points. We have 2 more games against Benin and Lesotho. And if we win those 2 games, South Africa have to play Rwanda and Zimbabwe, which are admittedly lighter opponents, but they could theoretically slip up. And Benin as well could slip up, which gives us the window to actually win this group. When a few weeks ago when I was on, we were 6 points adrift with 2 games left, and it was mission impossible. Second place will not get us through simply because this group hasn't gotten enough points. But all of a sudden, the opportunity is there. And if Eric Chell plays the right lineup with Fredericks and Bashi at centre-backs, no Troost Ekong, and he platforms his best players. If Osman could just be wrapped in cotton wool, because we saw him on Tuesday against Liverpool, he can't stay fit. It was his first game back, and he gets subbed off 62nd minute with another injury. If he can stay fit, if we can put Lookman in the position where he won Africa's best player, which is on the left wing, if we can give, it will be somebody to work with in midfield, whether that's Ndidi, whether that's Onyeka, whoever we want to put. I have faith now. We had a 4% chance before. It'd give us a solid 35 now. I'm not a mathematician anymore. I left that in GCSEs, but I think we have a much greater chance now. And there is renewed optimism. This week is Independence Day. Independence Day was yesterday, but for me, this is a bigger story that the World Cup hopes are back on.
Yeah, independent, 1960, October the 1st. However, you've forgotten our key ingredient, that call that we have to make. Nigeria is a very religious place. I don't know if you know this, Miguel. When we pray, our prayers are heard in heaven. And so, as we say in the Yoruba tribe, Nitori Olohun, please don't forget to, which means in the name of the Lord.
If you compare us to the other countries, Tim made a joke about it earlier that you could have 200 countries and we'd still struggle. And if you actually look at the other quote unquote serious pot 1 nations, I completely agree. Egypt have 20 points, Senegal have 18, Cape Verde 19, Morocco 21, Cote d'Ivoire 20, Algeria 19, Tunisia 22, and Ghana 19. We have 11. We've drawn 5 of our 8 games. So we really don't deserve this. I don't want to, I want to be entirely honest. We don't deserve this.
We'll end up winning the World Cup though, because our prayers will be answered.
Anything is possible. It is a legitimate miracle. Like, no jokes aside, because we don't deserve this whatsoever, but we take what we can get.
It's been amazing. We've got to bring it to an end. Thank you both very much. Miguel Ferreira, don't forget his book is Pasión, The Journey to the Soul of Spanish Football. And Atalani Oyewumi can be found on social media all over the place. And Tim, of course, and me are back with you next time around. Thank you.
Get in touch with the Brazilian Shirt Name Podcast on Twitter at BrazilShirtPod, or you can email us BrazilianShirtNamePod@gmail.com. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe, rate and tell a friend. The Brazilian Shirt Name Podcast is an 1129 production.